My name is Alan Murray. I'm the president of the Pew Research Center. I'm delighted all of you came to our forum on the future of nonprofit news. I think the fact that we are having such a forum means we think there is a future, but we can debate that when we get going. This event is co-hosted by the Pew Research Center and by the Knight Foundation. As all of you, I hope, have seen by now, we both have some interesting research that sheds light on the topic. In the case of the Pew Research Center, we identified 172 nonprofit news organizations, got 93 of them to actually complete the survey, and have presented the results to you. In the case of Knight, Mayur and Michael, who isn't quite here, but I'm sure he's coming soon, looked at 18 Knight grantees and did a somewhat deeper dive into those. So we're going to be, I'm going to take it for granted that all of you have read both, and we'll leap into our discussion from there. A great mix of people around the table, many of you obviously practitioners, many of you funders, some of you thought leaders, and then there's Jeff. I don't
He's on a higher level.
Sui generis. And some really important topics to talk about. It's clear from our survey that the #1 issue on the minds of people in the nonprofit news field is what is the right business model, and how the hell do we find the time to actually do it? And so we want to spend some time talking about that. We want to talk about the balance of resources between news, creating content, and marketing, developing the business model. We're going to talk about, hopefully spend some time sharing best practices around the table. We're going to try and spend the first 30 minutes or so really focusing on those business questions. We'll take a short break, let everybody get a cup of coffee, and then come back and focus more on the questions of audience. What are you finding? What are you doing? Is each publication completely unique in the way it builds and engages its audiences, or are there things that we can share with each other to do it better? Before we dive in, I should call quickly on Amy and Mayur. Amy, if there's anything you really want to point out from the research you did, or any particular questions you hope we're able to answer in the next couple of hours.
Well, here's the first question. Are we supposed to push when we speak?
No.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. Well, I would just reiterate what Alan said, basically, in terms of being able to pull a group like this together in this room. It's just a fabulous mix of people, and our hope, and one of the things we learned in doing this initial report was not just to help get a better sense of the landscape, but also we really did get a sense through the follow-up conversations with people about the differences in understandings, questions and uncertainties that exist inside this landscape, really from all sides, from people that are doing the funding to those that are practitioners and those that are studying it, around not only the areas of financial sustainability. What does it mean to have financial health? What does it even mean to have cash on hand in this kind of industry? But also, how do you measure impact? And then the questions around audience engagement and understanding technology and ways to reach people. And if you do indeed have a staff of 3 or 4 or 2, how do you manage those 3 tiers of editorial, financial, and then the audience engagement and technology impact? And I've had a chance to chat with a fair number of you in the last half hour, and everybody has a lot to say, either some areas that they're really excited about, innovations they've been able to do, and partnerships and ways that they've developed their own organizations, or roadblocks or frustrations that they want to share and get some insights on. So I'm looking forward to giving everybody a chance to talk and push this conversation further down the road.
Mayur.
Great. Morning, everyone. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you to Pew for hosting us today. And thanks to all of you for coming. We're really looking forward to the conversation. Just very quickly on the report that we produced at Knight. This is really complementary to Pew's work. So we're our sector is like gold. It's so rare to have very good information that has a set of benchmarks and a set of insights that are comparative. We hope this is going to be valuable. We've tried to divide it up into three main sections. One on reach, engagement, and distribution. Set of insights and information about revenue, where the money is coming from, how that's been progressing. And the third on organizational capacity. How many people are allocating resources to really drive the engine that's producing great journalism and great social value. So we have a great discussion about where there has been progress, and certainly there has been progress in the field, as well as what the opportunities are on the horizon. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, and I should point out that this is the beginning of what we hope will be a continuing partnership between the Pew Research Center and the Knight Foundation. We're looking at a series of questions on how people get news and information in today's news ecosystem, starting with, am I allowed to talk about this, Amy? Starting with a study on Facebook, which will be coming out. Do you want to put a date on it? No,
This fall.
This fall. It will be coming out this fall. Look, it was clear from the able to wean off of that funding. And what both reports seem to suggest is that the glass is either half empty or half full, however you choose to view it. I will point out that I think our survey showed that this is by nature a very optimistic bunch, so you all seem to view it as half full. I think 80% of the people we surveyed were convinced that they would still be solvent 5 years from now, which I'm not sure we would have said that at the Wall Street Journal a few years ago. So we might not have been correct, yeah. But Dick Toffel, let me start with you because you're the gorilla in the room. 44 employees, that's like Napoleon's armies in this crowd. And get you to address what is the elephant in the room. When the Sandlers go away, is there life? Are you getting there? Are you getting where you need to get? Do you have the diversified revenue to continue?
For us, I think the answer is yes. I mean, with the Sandlers started out at, probably close to 95% of the funding. And last year, we had them down to 38% of the funding, and this year I hope we'll get under 30. So that is very important diversification. I do think, as we talk about foundations as we go through this, I would distinguish, because I think it's a fundamentally important distinction, between family foundations, which I think are analytically indistinguishable from wealthy individuals who give away their money through another vehicle, and institutional foundations, which is to say people whose job it is, as at the Knight Foundation, for instance, and many others represented in the room, to give away money that was originally somebody else's. Those lead you to very different places.
In what sense?
Well, the behavior of an institutional foundation, I think as the institutional foundations, and I used to work in one, are quick to remind you they cannot fund you for 20 years in a row. I mean, they could a little bit, but they probably shouldn't, and it's not their job, right, to send a general operating support check to the same place for 20 years in a row. If they were going to do that, why would they need the people who run the place, frankly? And the idea is that they should be a little bit more at the cutting edge. They should be a little bit more venture capital. High net worth individuals, or whatever euphemism you want to use, people often support the same cause
for a long, long time.
A long, long time. Last point, diversification of revenues, I would think of, again, analytically in two different ways, Alan. One is, how much is one going to diversify away from philanthropy altogether, and how much is one going to diversify within philanthropy to a range of different sorts?
Good, and we should definitely come back to that. But let me go to John Thornton, because Dick Toffel's comments made me wonder if you're prepared to support the Texas trip forever, or are you trying to create a sustainable model so it doesn't have to depend on your contributions?
When Captain Sullenberger flew the jet into the Hudson, there was a line that came after in the telling of the story. And at some point, he said to his co-pilot, "My airplane." And when I put my second $1 million in, I said, "Evan, your airplane." So the answer is, I'm done. But that's, I think, great news for the Tribune in the sense that that's been that has been the ideal all along, is that we would over time diversify to the point that major philanthropy, which we define as any gift over $5,000, would be sort of gravy and would be used for new initiatives rather than to keep the lights on. We're not there. We're still about a third reliant on major philanthropy.
So you're distinguishing major philanthropy from members, small donors.
$5,000 and up. We think of
Anything
that.
above 5,000.
Yeah, we think of that. It's the accountants don't let us treat it that way, but we think of anything of $5,000 and up. We wish we could not run that through our income statement. We think of that as equity investment, and so we'd like to just not think about that as anything but investment in the business, and we don't think about it as sustainable revenue.
You comfortable with that, Emily? You're going to get there?
I mean, I think the goal for us obviously is to move more toward earned revenue, and it's what we've been doing from the beginning. I mean, I think from an editorial standpoint, talking about foundations for a second, our goal is obviously to wean ourselves as much as we can off of major philanthropy and off of foundation money, because it's, well, to put it bluntly, there's strings attached often. I mean, when you think about foundation dollars, the foundation money that we get generally comes with some kind of editorial responsibility, and that's either a responsibility for a deliverable, that's a responsibility to build a particular data interactive, it's a responsibility to write X number of stories on a particular, subject, policy, vertical. So I think generally speaking, the goal for us is to move as much toward earned revenue as humanly possible because there are no strings attached.
That makes you sound like the bad guys, Elspeth. Do you attach strings to your grants?
Sometimes. Generally, we don't, actually, not with our journalism grants. Generally, as much as possible, we make them general operating support grants. Of course, we do require reports.
And you want out at some point?
Inevitably, we reach a point where we have to move on, but we don't go into, in our media work, we actually don't think about this as having a time limit. There are areas of our work where we do. This is not one. Would we go 20 years with a grant? We have gone almost that long with some organizations. There are some places we've been supporting for 20, 25 years. POV comes to mind as a place we've supported for, I think, 25 years.
Dan, will you do 20, 25 years?
It's possible, particularly because with certain foundations like ours that have specific objectives that are well beyond journalism, but are about, informing, engaging, even at, much more for knowledge building on certain issues.
That starts to sound like the strings that Emily was talking about.
Yeah, they're strings. And so the strings are, which is why funding organizations that actually embrace the notion that they're responsible for informing and engaging certain audiences on certain issues, those are things where if that's the best alternative for a certain foundation with certain goals, you'll keep doing it.
Yeah. Joel, how many employees do you have now?
I always find that a hard question because we have so many different types, full-time, part-time, contract, freelance, but I'd say it's in the range of 20 to 22 full-time equivalents.
Yeah, and are you getting towards a sustainable business model?
We're getting towards it. We're not fully there for a couple of reasons. One, my wife and I work and don't take a salary, and eventually that will have to be replaced by somebody who does. And secondly, we haven't built the kind of reserves that I would call what's required for a stable organization. I do want to go back to something very interesting, I think, that between what Dick said and what John said, which relates to this definition of what is sustainable. Okay, if you use the model that John used, then any gifts over $5,000 are not part of your operations, then you are really trying to achieve a kind of sustainability that the vast majority of nonprofit cultural institutions, for example, in the United States, I don't know if they aspire to it, but none of them achieve
Symphony
it.
orchestras don't
The
do
orchestras,
that. Opera
public
houses
radio,
don't
the
do that.
museums, they all get large numbers of $5,000 annual gifts as part of their operations. So I'm not saying that's not a desirable goal.
But you think it's
But-
unrealistic?
No, I'm not even, it may not be unrealistic for the Texas Tribune.
Aspirational.
But what I'm saying is that the definitions matter because that is a kind of sustainability that almost resembles being in a for-profit business.
So-
Whereas what Dick is talking about, diversification within philanthropy, we get half our donations from people who give 1,000 or more, but we get half from smaller gifts. Well, is that philanthropy? Some people call it philanthropy, some people call it membership, but we're not really giving a lot back. I think of it as just smaller version of philanthropy, it's small donors. So I think the question of what kind of sustainability you're after matters. What MinPost is after and aspires to and is making progress on but is not there is to not be dependent on foundations for more than, say, 10 or 15% of our budget. But within the rest, we are agnostic as to whether we make the money from, quote, true earned income by nonprofit standards like advertising
events.
versus whether we get it from donors.
Do you have a goal for, donations versus earned income?
Well, right now, we get about 25% of our money from advertising and sponsorship, and we would like to get that higher.
Yeah.
But we are comfortable with the fact that most of our money is philanthropic. Most of our money comes from individuals.
Let's hear from some of the small guys, and for purposes of this discussion, big is anybody with a double-digit number of full-time employees. But we've got three people right here at the end of the table who are well below that standard. Which of you would like to talk about how it's going? Susan.
So we spend about 30% of our income is from ads as well. And that kind of earned income is super important to us because part of our mission is to help local small business. But the place where we don't have the resources to really do everything we'd like to is really in individual philanthropy and family foundations. So we've done well with national grants to support journalism projects, but the kind of team, we have 2 people who basically work full-time and a lot of freelancers. It's been really hard to...
2 people total?
Yeah.
At Oakland
Yeah,
Local?
yeah. And a lot of, freelancers and volunteers. And it's been really hard to find the resources both to build up a really competent ad team and then to really work on the board development and the kind of giving that I think some of you have really excelled at.
I mean, based on our survey, that's not just a problem for the small organizations, that's a problem for the big organizations. I think the majority of people said that they didn't have either the time or the resources to build up the business side of the business. Brian, how many employees?
We have 4 employees.
Okay.
Yep. And I wish foundation money was a bigger problem for me.
Well, maybe somebody here can help you with that.
The 2 grants in our budget this year, haven't come through yet. So most of our support comes from individual donors. For us, the threshold is 1,000. So 1,000 and up is a major donor, and that's more than 50% of our revenue. We also have underwriting on the website, and that's about 14%.
You call it underwriting, not advertising.
I'll call it whatever it takes to get it. It doesn't matter to me what we call it.
Dylan?
Yeah, call it what you want, advertising, sponsorship, as long as there's a exchange of a check for something on the website, that's, the terminology doesn't matter so much. And we have 1 full-time employee, essentially me, and the rest, a team of freelancers, just to ensure that we remain as flexible as possible as our income ebbs and flows. I would certainly like to have more people dedicated full-time, and, it just depends on the, on an election night, we've got the biggest news team in town, and other times it's me plugging away all by myself.
So how does that work on election night? You have volunteers?
Volunteers and, some really good freelancers, and, we just could go out and kick some ass.
So who wants to talk about this balance between resources devoted to content and resources devoted to developing the business, which was a consistent theme in the surveys that we did? Yeah, Kevin.
So, INN, as you know, has 86 members now of the 172, so we're about 50%. And, we see some stratification, obviously, too. one of the adages I like to sort of say is that if you give a reporter $100,000, they're going to spend $99,000 on the reporting, right? So we spend a lot of time educating nonprofits on how to bifurcate the business side from the editorial side. But the fact is that, I don't know how to say this any other way, but the reason why a lot of these folks got into the nonprofit is to keep investigative journalism going. But the reason why they are nonprofits is because they are mission-driven organizations, not revenue-driven organizations, right? So the IRS and the thinking of charity and the way that works is such that their expectation is that philanthropy remains a very big part of the mix, and we see that as well. So on one hand, we're seeing more resources being put towards the business side, but the fact is that the content still remains the biggest push within most of the smaller organizations because they feel like the business is something they do after hours. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, it's just something that we're seeing.
It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Now, some of that in our survey, Chris, let me put you on the spot. Some of that in our survey, they said came from the donors. That the donors, wanted most of the money to go to the mission, as Kevin put it, and not to overhead or.
And unfortunately, some of the statistics that people rely on for good philanthropy is the least amount of money possible going to administration or to the organization itself. We try at Dodge to, frankly, give most of our money on to general operating support because we're trying to give people as much flexibility as possible. And to me, that's the organizational side and what we call the technical assistance side, helping organizations develop, whether it's fundraising capability or organizational development or whatever it happens to be, is as or more important than the other things that they're doing, to be honest with you.
So how do we change that here today? I mean, that's a consistent theme. There seems to be pretty general agreement. If somebody around the table wants to argue with the notion, but pretty general agreement that all of you need to be spending a greater share of your funding on developing the business. Yes, Feather.
I just want to draw a distinction here because this is has a bit of a clinical feel to it. I've now been sort of up close and personal with about 5 of these, and they all seem to start with people who come out of legacy journalism of one kind or another, where no matter where they are, the community they're in, and I suspect some of these are that way too, in legacy journalism, everybody had classifieds, groceries, and car dealers, and so the business model was fairly simple. When you get into the kind of work that people are doing now, you're dealing with different funder communities and donor communities, different expectations in the constituencies that you're aiming at. But I think the thing that's been the most striking to me across the ones we've seen is how hugely different the entrepreneurial impulses of the leadership is. And so when you talk sort of clinically about what proportion of your business should be here versus there,
they're doing what they're doing where their passion is.
They're following, or they just don't have the entrepreneurial bone in their body. And it's a big part, I think, of why we're having this conversation. Yeah. But without it in the DNA of the organization, they're never going to make it. And so I just think it's a little bit more idiosyncratic to the organization. Yeah. If we see an organization that is doing all the right things about figuring out how to diversify revenue, we wouldn't be looking at what that proportion is because we can see them doing it. If they can't produce even a plan to think about it after 3 or 4 years, you've got a real problem.
You're right. Let me say, if anybody wants to jump into this discussion, just take your name card and turn it sideways. I think it will stand up sideways. Jeff's testing it. It works. But first I want to go to Ruth.
Okay. I think this is interesting because I think that the categorizations of things get mixed up here. We want to talk about business, but we are in a nonprofit setting, and therefore the definitions of things are a little bit different. So I think that when people look at, what's this level of donor issue, it really has to do with independence. And, so at our shop, what we do is we categorize all individual donors without strings attached as payments. It's earned revenue. Somebody's paying because they like what we're producing. We're not charging anything because that doesn't work in this environment, but we consider these to be voluntary payments. It's earned revenue. We consider the same of any underwriting or sponsorship we have because we have to earn that by the quality of our work. What we don't want to do is to exchange editorial our editorial judgment for the money. That's essentially what it is. We don't want to exchange the focus of our content or the quality of our content for money.
But how about the quantity?
And the quantity. We don't want to have to do that. But I think that but I think the question is, we want the quantity because we want the impact. The quantity, once we get it and we have the impact, it actually produces income in voluntary payments if we work it right. But getting to where it works right and where people have the expectation to pay for it actually takes capital. And I don't think that we've gotten to the place yet in this field where we understand how much capital it takes to build up a good, strong set of individual donors, and how much capital it takes to build up sponsorships. But I feel like our business model has to include, these are our strategic advantages as nonprofits. We can use volunteers as part of our structures, and we can take voluntary money.
Jeff and then Margaret.
Quick question first to Amy. Do we have any sense of the 172 sites, what their total reach is?
Total reach in
Total
terms
reach.
of
People.
audience?
Audience, yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah, and I think
measured in
just people, uniques.
in terms of uniques, well,
have to be a
yeah,
couple of
because
million.
one of the elements that hopefully we'll talk about are content partnerships, where the work that these organizations are doing is being carried in the daily newspaper or in others that have a wider audience reach. So
Here's I'd like to know that at some point, but the reason I ask is we have a lot of brain power around the table, me excluded, talking about something that I think, when you're talking about a nation of 300 plus million people, the 172 sites isn't a lot. We have to remember that those sites fit in an ecosystem. And there's a choice. Feather's absolutely right. Journalists do not think like entrepreneurs. That's why I teach entrepreneurial journalism. And some of them can't be taught, but some of them can be, and some of them get the passion for it. You have people like Elizabeth Green down the table who started not-for-profit, and she's a great salesperson. And the question comes at some point is, why are you for profit? Why are you not? Why are you for profit or not? Why are you not for profit? Mm-hmm. So I think it's a bit of a red herring to make the whole organization of the thought around just not for profit. There's a question of sustainability, period. There's a question of value, period. There's a question of the business skills necessary to do administration and marketing and selling, whether to advertisers or users.
And presumably these issues are no less pressing for the ones that are organized as for-profits.
I get in trouble with my granola colleagues when I refuse to allow my students to do not-for-profit. But that's because the discipline of learning the business is higher at a for-profit level. At the end of the day, it's a tax decision.
I do think it's a bit of a journalist blind spot. I mean, I remember after 9/11 when I went to South Brunswick for the first time, where all the business people of the Wall Street Journal were. Someone said, "Who the hell are these people? We thought we were the Wall Street Journal, and who were these thousands of people making phone calls and taking orders and doing all these things?" But Elizabeth, you got such a big build up there. I feel like I should give you the opportunity to say something if you'd like, and then we'll come over to Margaret.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that I actually, so we're an organization now. We merged two nonprofit education news sites in local communities, and now we have, I just calculated, we will have 12 and a half full-time employees by the end of the year. So I guess we're big, according to, but I feel pretty small.
By our criteria, you're big. Yeah.
And I was going to say that from my perspective, I think we are here, our funders hear what these reports say, and they tell us, please invest in your business side. And the question that I'm asking myself more often is exactly what constitutes a business side. And my understanding of that has gotten a lot sharper over time, but to me, that's where the conversation should go, not what's the percentage, but really what do we mean when we say that for our
what
sector?
are the different ways that you can monetize your site?
No, I mean, what are the specific functions and roles? So I think we have a pretty good idea of how we should be monetizing, and we're doing it, and we can invest in that going forward. But beyond just investing in earned revenue creation, there's other elements that constitute business that are important, that get that done, that I didn't count in that column. So marketing and distribution and engagement and operations, these are all things that pretty much we need to build from scratch.
And is there a model that would be applicable to the organizations sitting around this table? Are you all so different that there is no model that would apply to each? I mean, Margaret, speaking of mergers, you're merging with the local public radio station, aren't you?
Right, yeah, St. Louis Public Radio. That's on track to happen. Well, I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Feather said about how do you get entrepreneurial bones in the bodies of these journalists, and a little bit on what Jeff said. I think that, there are different ways that you can infuse an organization with an entrepreneurial spirit. Some people have it naturally. You can specifically bring someone into the organization that can do that, or you can partner with someone who has those skills. And, that's part of the rationale behind the partnership that's coming up between the merger between the Beacon and St. Louis Public Radio. But I think there's
they know how to do it. They know how
well,
to
they
build
have
the
certain
membership.
established, they've got a big base of small donors. We have a great base of large donors. There's some complementary business things, and we were either going to have to build those things on the business side for ourselves or partner with someone. And on the news side, they were either going to have to build a much bigger newsroom or partner with someone who had it. So that's a good match there. But I think there's an issue of size here, and getting a little bit to what Jeff said. I mean, the point is, it's not really are you for-profit or non-profit. It's are you doing the mission of public service, which is why why the nonprofit sector came up, because that was falling out of a lot of what the for-profit sector was doing. And I looked at the numbers in these studies, and so many of the organizations are very small and producing really content very sporadically. And so that's a problem both on the business side for getting the necessary resources and skills as entrepreneurs, and it's a problem on the impact side. And I think that's a central problem that all of us have to think about. Yeah. If we're really going to fill the gap that we saw opening up, it takes some size to do it.
Eric, you've been making grants in this area for how long?
12 years, I guess. The one thing I wanted to say was inspired by what Jeff just said, which is this is also new. I mean, you're also new as a large group. That we really don't have the kinds of measurements that the legacy media have been developing in some cases for a century. Mm-hmm. And so we can't even say how many people consume your stuff. We can say how many people look at your websites, but until you know exactly how many people consume your stuff, doing things like what Dick is doing with tagging at ProPublica to try to get a sense of the overall audience, then it's hard for us to sell this to other funders, because your 172 might be 50 million. It might be. It might be more or as many people consuming news in traditional public broadcasting. Mm-hmm. Or it might not be, but it might be way more people than go to the symphony. But until we know, it's harder to make the argument to foundations that don't traditionally, and individuals who don't traditionally fund media. So I think it may sound basic, but I think it's really a big deal.
That's one more thing you don't have the money to spend on, right?
Right.
Technology. And technology is another issue that maybe we'll talk about a little bit after the break. But Steve, let me get you in here.
Sure. I'm one of the legacy guys that Feather talked about that was not put on this planet to manage money. John talked about equity investment, and I'm like, equity investment. I'll have to look that up later and make sure I'm down with it. I got the journalism part down pretty good. And we started off, we have 11 employees now, and one of them is a non-journalist. It's our development director. And I thought, oh, great, I've hired the one person who's going to go out and raise all my money. You know, I'm done with that. I'm going to go take care of the journalism. And through some programs and some tough love from Kevin Davis and some partners at INN, have realized, you know, my journalism days are over. You know, I've got to be a business person. Yeah, it's been tough. But it's absolutely critical, and I've recently hired a half-time person to do some more outreach and marketing events, and steal plenty of ideas from Emily's organization in putting on events that we can sell sponsorships against. One thing I wanted to bring up, though, you know, our friends at the end of the table talked about, you know, it doesn't matter what the check is for, whether it's advertising or sponsorships. I don't know how you square that with your accountant. You know, whether there's some taxable income that you get from true advertising versus, you know, what we'd like to call underwriting.
I only do underwriting, but if I'm talking to a local small business person who wants to get the word out about their business, even though I'm only going to take something that is not a call to action ad, I'm going to speak to him in his own terms and call that an ad because that's what's going to make that sale. But that doesn't mean it is going to be advertising in the IRS sense. It'll be
and you're probably not going to take your accountant with you on the sales call.
Exactly. Yeah.
Penny?
Let me talk about it from two angles, having spent half my life as a journalist and half on the other side. And half as a journalist and half on the other side. When I made the transition, I figured out the common, what was in common between the two, and it is that you need to ask the question, who's your primary customer? You cannot go for funding, you cannot go for sponsorship unless you have a clear notion of who your primary customer is. Because whether you're going for a grant or whether you're looking at hiring a vice president of development or somebody who's going to go out and raise the sponsorship. The second thing I wanted to make was a point that's come back to me several times as I've been doing a book on for-profit community news organizations over the last 4 or 5 years. And that is that we have been basically de facto geographic monopolies, and we still operate in isolation of one another. What hit me as I looked around everybody that was here and of the report is how small and how isolated everyone is. And I was reminded of that wonderful quote from Elie Noem in his book in 2009, that the key to sustainability is learning how to take advantage of the economics of networking in this age. And so I think there's both a way to think about pulling everything together on the nonprofit side, but also merging it better with the for-profit side too going forward.
Rose, you wanted to say something about that?
I wanted to point out that, you know, because we are in these little ecosystems, really where you are in many ways is going to determine how you do. I'll talk later about some of the difficulties I've had with other editors and publishers in North Carolina, getting them to accept the model that I'm doing. And, you know, since I'm doing a state-based model, you need to reach out to them. And if they're like, you know, it's hard to do. So then you kind of end up relying on donors because you can't get the business side to kind of to give
But is there a serious scale problem here? I mean, is the kind of thing that Margaret's doing, you know, do you all, maybe what you really need to be doing is go out there and look for partners either in other locales or within your market that you can reach the kind of scale that lets you do what you need to do to build up these business skills. Yes. As one of the big guys.
I get so tired of the idea that we need to scale things. You know, every one of the communities that we are in is so very different and has different needs, different holes to be filled, a different situation of where you can actually get some revenue developed, that there's not going to be one model. There's not going to be one template, fill in the blanks, do this, do this, do
Patch
this.
is not the answer.
Well, we've seen the answer to whether patch is the answer, you know?
Brian, do you agree with that?
The bloom is off that rose.
Small is beautiful.
Small is beautiful. I mean, we don't feel the need to get bigger in the respect of getting outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. But a point I would make is that many of the nonprofits in this room are highly networked to each other. We've been meeting for the past 3 years in Chicago at Block by Block at that conference. We're now part of the Lion Publishers Group, and we'll be meeting again in Chicago next month. So that's been a real important vehicle for us to not feel isolated. In the daily work we do, we're small, have big impact in our community, but we have learned a lot. I've learned a lot going to conferences, thanks to Knight, through the CJET program, and learning best practices and bringing those back to Charlottesville. So I think there is a lot of activity going on that we need to recognize and thank people for convening us.
Dick, you've had that name tag up for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce a little caveat to all of this stuff about how there is no fundamental difference between nonprofit and for-profit. There are a number of actually quite important differences, and here's one of them, which I just think we need to bear in mind. As you build a nonprofit, as you know, Alan was one of the very best business reporters I ever worked with, as you'll know better than anybody, right? There are ways that great for-profits have been built that involve running losses for considerable periods of time that are economically rational because you are building enterprise value, right? When Twitter lost gazillion dollars, I don't know how much they lost, you know, over their first number of years, nobody at Twitter lost a minute's sleep about it because they knew they would get to where they got to this week, right? Which is we have enterprise value. The thing is worth $1 billion or $2 billion or however many billion, and it's all good. Nonprofits have no enterprise value. There is no way to realize it. And because of that, top line growth counts for nothing, right? Bottom line growth is all that matters. Now, you can do top line growth as long as it will, in relatively due course, lead to bottom line growth. Or if you have very patient investors who are willing to lose a lot of money and never get it back, donors, right, you can do that too. But this is a fundamental distinction that I think people, as I did, who spent their, you know, first 20 years or 30 years or whatever in the for-profit media can sometimes miss about how you build a nonprofit business.
It's a good point. We're going to go Elspeth, Kevin, Ruth, and Joel. Are you done, or you still have it up? And then we're going to take a break. So I urge you to be very quick. Then we're going to get some coffee, and then we'll come back and talk about. We'll leave the business behind because we've solved it, and we'll talk about engagement. Elspeth.
I have been. I have been not turning on my mic. I have been noting with great delight the distribution partnerships that many of the groups around the table and others have been engaged in, lots of them with other nonprofits, but some with for-profit organizations. And, you know, I note it with delight, although I sort of hide it from our legal counsel at the foundation because I'm not sure how that would be taken. But I've also thought about, maybe somebody just wants to talk to me about this at the break, but I've also thought about the fact that the nonprofits will not, at least in the foreseeable future, be reimbursed the cost of producing that information. So one of the things that comes to my mind sitting and listening to this is that a resource that those for-profit organizations have is marketing, PR, human resources, all of those business things, and they're probably underutilized right now, whereas, you know, the nonprofits are giving them great content at very, very little cost, if any cost at all. So I'm wondering whether there's any possibility of trying to make some deals there.